Hey besties, welcome back to MB2 Underground. I am Sarah and I'm here with Joe Fox.
Yes, thank you for the introduction, Miss Kiefer, looking beautiful as always.
You're so nice to me.
Great to see you.
Well.
So I'm super excited to introduce our next guest, a true OG. OG doesn't even do it justice. We're about to talk to a founding partner of MB2, Dr. Gabe Shahwan. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
I feel like we should call this the MB2 exclusive.
I mean, this is a big deal.
Yeah.
You don't get founding partners just any day.
Mm-mm.
I mean, you could. I mean, I'm down the street like 20 minutes. So.
He's like, is this exclusive?
We had to lure you in with the pro shop.
That's right.
Thanks for coming, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Of course.
So I think a great way to kick us off may be telling the story of how you met one Dr. Chris Steven Villanueva.
Yeah. So this was back in 2007.
Wow.
Back then, I just graduated dental school in Houston. Mauricio Dardano was one of my classmates, and he came and he got a job with Dr. V. Dr. V had just bought the first 3 practices. So he bought 3 practices in April, I believe, of 2007. Dardano, he came down, met with him, got a job with him. And for myself, I came and I just needed a job for Saturdays. So I started with Dr. V, working one of his practices just Saturdays. And during the weekdays, I had another job where I was supposed to, it was a long-term, I shadowed a guy. I was going to go work for him. I was going to buy his practice, all those things they teach you in dental school you're supposed to do. I was going through the process. And so I'd work there during the week, work for Dr. V at one of his practices on the weekend that lasted about 3 weeks. And
wow.
I wasn't, I mean, I'm normally more committed than 3 weeks, but it was different working for a guy that had multiple practices that I was in there and I was able to see the patients I wanted to see. I could do whatever I want as a doctor. And then in the private practice, working for a doctor who the patients had seen the same doctor for 30 years, it was hard to kind of to build that out. And so after 3 weeks, I gave up. And because I would see more patients in a day working for Dr. V than in a whole week in private practice.
You didn't give up, you pivoted.
Sure.
Is that a pivoted?
That is a word.
Is that the past tense of pivot?
Yes.
Pivoted.
It is now.
It is now.
That's what I did.
You pivoted.
I pivoted.
So then you went to Dr. V and said...
So yeah, I mean, he needed full time too. So I switched it around and I just came on full time in 2007. I dropped the other job, which I was supposed to buy after 5 years. And it was my whole plan, right?
Isn't it crazy to think of like where your life would be had you not?
I know. Yeah.
Yeah,
And maybe
that
great.
fork in the road.
But yeah, that's kind of what I did. And so I worked for him for about a year or so. The first time I met Dr. V, I mean, he was younger back then. We all were. he was
almost 2 decades ago.
Yeah, he was working on patients. He was really good at like clinical dentistry and stuff. And so, so he would work a practice. I would work on the practice. Mauricio was working the 3rd practice.
Wow.
And so we did that for about a year. After a year, like most dentists, I was planning on thinking about my career and what I'm going to do with it, and maybe just leaving in a few years and opening my own practice like we're supposed to. Like we're all trained. We're supposed to do.
Yep.
And that's whenever Dr. V started with the idea of MB2. It was if each one of us individually can do well, why can't we just do it together? And so the fear, I guess, that I had whenever we decided to partner up to create practices, the fear was most times, or we're told most partnerships fail. And so in dentistry, most partnerships fail. Maybe outside dentistry, I don't know. But in dentistry, most partnerships fail. And the problem is because there's competing, you have to work together for a long period of time, but also there might be competing ideas, right?
Yeah.
And so whenever you can't there's a 50-50 partnership, whenever you can't come to an agreement on something,
Then what?
Then what? And who wins? And is there long-term animosity and things like that? For us, we each had our own lane. And so whenever I partnered with Dr. V, he focused more on creating the centralized services for us. So we've never had to like deal with certain things like figuring out how to get a P&L and posting jobs for staff members and paying staff. Like he would focus on the centralized services while we as doctors in the field would focus more on the operational side of things, do things the way we want to within our practices. And so it kept us so that there was rarely ever an argument whenever we just kind of do our own thing.
It's so cool. I feel like we've told the story of the MB2 inception so many times, but to actually like hear about sitting there and because I always think if one of my friends came to me and said, I have this idea, let's go into business together, I'd be like, you are batshit crazy. Yeah. But like, I mean, obviously it ended up working out. So it's just kind of cool to hear like where everybody's state of mind was at the time.
Super cool. Now, let me ask you this. Did you go to Dr. V with a, hey, I want to be an owner and I think I'm going to be gone a certain period of time, or?
So Mauricio did that.
Really?
Right? You're like, I'm going to let you go first and let me know how that goes.
Well, we didn't really discuss it, right? But he did that, and that kind of pushed Dr. V to make a decision to, all right, I got to replace him. I got to train up a new guy. What's the long-term goal? Or, why not, instead of you going off and doing your own thing, I just invest in your future. And so that kind of set the start of the path of kind of what was available. For me, I knew Dr. V was successful in these 3 practices. And I believe if you surround yourself with successful people, you will in turn be successful, right? And so that was more of the comfort level of seeing kind of what he was able to do in just 3 practices. What about if we could do in more practices? And what about if we can, do that while focusing less on figuring out how to run a practice or a business, because we'll just hire those people to do those business side things for us. And it just happened to work out well.
At that time, what did you picture was the like possibility? Like, I mean, we're at over 700 practices now. Is that what you saw when you're sitting there with your bros? Like,
no.
What do we do next? Or was it like, it'd be cool if we had 6?
Yeah, no, that was exactly right. It'd be cool if we had 6, right? Like it was every year, our goal was to kind of, we reassess. We didn't have any bank notes. We didn't have any funding. We didn't get any external money because we didn't want to cross-collateralize the practice. If one fails, we don't want them all to fail. And so it was really about risk. We didn't want to risk the whole for a few. And so the growth was however much money we had in our bank account, that was how much we can spend on a practice, on opening a practice. And so that's why they were pretty much all de novos. They're all startups. We each put in, there's a third of each practice that we'd invest in. We put in, at that time, 150,000 each. Our money would be gone. We would build up back our own finances, and then we would take an assessment a year and say, okay, now how many can we build?
Let's do it again.
And so let's do it again. And so that was our barometer on how fast we're going to grow. And we didn't have any goals of numbers or how many we should get to. And it was just, how much money do you have? And then do you invest in other things or what you know? And so that's why we grew the way we did for 10 years. And we got to 85 practices in 10 years doing it that way. But it was never our goal. We didn't have individual number of goals for that.
It happened organically.
Yeah, it happened organically.
What were the early years of the central services like? Tell me about the genesis of that. How that
it was 2 people. It was one of the owners' wives was kind of doing all the finance, and then Dr. V's sister was doing the HR side of it. And that was it. I mean, that took care of all of our stuff of what we needed to do to pay the staff members and to take care of everything. But HR was also marketing, right? Like it was all like that. And as we grew the number of offices, we grew the number of personnel. And so it was probably after we had 5 practices and we had those 2 people, by the time we had 15 practices, there were probably 15 people. When we had 40 practices, there were about 40 people doing those same functions, but more specialized and spread out. So it allowed us to kind of, as we grew, we would add on those people. So they're just, each piece was done better, I guess. I don't know if that's true, but it felt like it.
Love it. That's such a cool story. So you've seen the evolution of MB2 again, 0 practices or 3 practices to, 712, right? What has that been like as a founder? I mean, it's very rare in the business community that you get to interact with founders of very large businesses that have been successful. And the reality is most businesses fail, right? Yeah. So like what does that feel like? Or, I mean, walk us through that mindset.
Yeah, it's crazy. right? Because you never expect that whenever you're starting out, whenever you're going through the process, and your only goal is to survive. And make sure that everyone as you survive is there and still happy and still being taken care of. And I even just focusing, I got up to 6 practices that I owned and meant, like, I had associates within those practices and I mentored. But I always felt like whenever I was doing well in one, it's like a boat and there's a hole that's in the back and you go plug that hole and then there's another one on the other side. And so it was constantly like holes where you have to go plug and you have to figure out how to stay afloat. And I had that on a small scale with just 6 practices, but then we grew to 40 practices and it had its own holes, right? It had its own issues. It had its own personalities and things like that. And I think what we figured out early on was, well, one thing, the doctor who's at the local office makes the decisions, right? Because only they will know how it affects them in their lives and their staff and their patients and all that kind of stuff. And so let them make their decisions. But secondly is, how do you keep the camaraderie, right? Mm-hmm. And that word's thrown around a lot, but it was more about when we were small, we would go all to Dr. V's house and another owner would cook steaks and we like, that's what we do on the weekends. And then whenever it got bigger, it was like, okay, let's go down to Huntsville and we did some stupid stuff on ATVs and like just
board meetings.
That's what it was, right? There was no executives. It was just us, right? Wow. And so whenever we grew, outside of Dallas-Fort Worth area, grew outside of Texas, it's how do you keep doctors connected? And we're able to do that whenever we were growing, even 85 practices, 36 owners back then. We're able to keep that connection. And I knew everybody, right? I could have a conversation with everybody. We're partners with everybody. I have, back then, direct equity in those practices as partners in those practices. And now that we're at 600 some odd owners, 712 locations, I mean, it's hard. It's very important, but it's hard to keep that connection with everybody because there's a lot of partners I haven't met and I don't know. And I try, but it's just, there's a lot of people. It's growing exponentially. In 2017, we were at 85 practices. And then now at 700, just 6 years later, 6 to 7 years later, it's a lot. It's a lot to keep up with. It's
so how do we do that? How do we maintain the culture? How do we maintain with the growth?
Yeah, so it's hard. And so we try to still do a lot of vacations, right? Where it's not learning how to be a better dentist, it's not CE, but it's just doctors having dinners with doctors meeting doctors, going on excursions and boat rides.
Getting on the dance floor.
Whatever. Yeah, dance floor. We have dance competitions. We got, we coordinate our outfits with all the owners, like things like that. It's going to those things. And a lot of times doctors who join MB2 and they kind of feel like they're on an island because they're off somewhere, then they come to one of those events, they leave different. It's a different mindset, right? Every time that they've met the doctors that they're partnered with and they understand kind of what they're part of, you could just see the issues or the complaints or whatever, they just don't quite know or understand how they fit within the whole. They leave and they know a lot of people. And they understand how they fit within the organization and they're proud of their partners and they go on vacation outside of MB2 with doctors that they meet because through MB2, or they open practices together within an organization and they never knew each other before. Like things like that, it's cool. And so that's how we try to keep it all connected.
I was going to say, it's been cool to watch MB2 adapt to that because this will be the first year we have 2 different owner trips. I know Dr. V is very adamant that like the small, like intimate feel is still there. I've also started saying owner trips because I one time said owners trips and a doctor thought I said strips, like owners strips. And so now I'm like hyper aware of it. Or even like our more local owner events where we have, maybe 20 to 30 doctors because it can feel a little overwhelming at a big event when you're a brand new partner or you are kind of on your lone island. So finding ways to get connected ahead of that or in a smaller capacity has been cool to watch.
Yeah, I mean, the organization continues to evolve and grow. Even the pro shop, it's brand new and it's beautiful. And so any partners out there who have not seen it yet, please come see us in Dallas and check it out. So rewind us back to 2017. Company had been in existence for 10 years. You had 85 practices from 3 to 85, incredible, tremendous growth. What was that conversation or decision like to take outside capital, right, with Sentinel?
So the goal was never for outside capital. It was never private equity. It was never what it is today, right? The company shifted and changed, but the opportunity presented itself where we got to a point where even in 2017, where we're adding 10 or 15 practices, we would go to all of our owners, we'd say, how much money do you have? And we'd throw it in a bucket. And we just use that to partner with practices or open new practices, right? That was our barometer. That was our limiting factor.
Yep.
It wasn't time. We would partner with smaller practices. We would do whatever because we had plenty of time, but we could only go as fast as our money could take us because there's no debt.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever we brought in private equity, it was to take some chips off the table, right, at a good value.
Well deserved.
And so we all we knew was, I don't want to say being broke, but that's all we knew, because as soon as we made money, it was gone, right? Yeah. I think that's what broke means. But then it shifted to where we took some chips off the table, and it was no longer money that was our problem. It was now time, right?
Yep.
It shifted to where now, if we spend too much time trying to turn around practices, we can do it. We had the manpower, we had the people to do it, but it took a lot of manpower.
Yeah.
And so whenever you can just take a successful business and you can make some tweaks, or you free up the doctor's time, they're successful dentists, but they're lacking time, what they could do with their own two hands. You offload a lot of that stuff to business people here centrally, it frees them up, and then they become a lot more successful and they grow exponentially. And so that's where the big shift changed. That's where whenever we partnered with private equity, up until that point, there was no large groups that we knew of with our JV model where local doctors still owned at a local level making decisions. It was all corporate models, the DSOs, if you will. It was all that where they were the ones who were partnered with private equity. And so it was a challenge to get a private equity group to look at a JV model and say, hey, this could work.
Yeah, see the benefit of it.
Yeah. Ironically enough, right? Because it's played out to be, far superior from a return perspective.
Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah. I think the finance geeks call that being capital constrained, right? When
that's what I call it, for sure.
You cannot grow because you literally just don't have access to enough capital, right? And so private equity money helped you meet new partners and grow, right? Without having to do the coins and the cash cushion, right? Of sidecar approach.
And not just do de novo startups, right? Or buying underperforming or partnering with underperforming offices, trying to train them around.
Flip jobs. Yeah. I would tell practices that when they would ask if we just partnered with if we partnered with failing practices and turned them around, I was like, no, it's like the old saying, don't drink to feel better, drink to feel even better. Like you don't want to drink because you need to feel better. You want to drink because you want to feel even better. We partner with practices to make them even better, not to make them better. They're already great. Yep. And to your point, that alleviates a lot of the constraints on time, because it's like-minded dentists that you're partnering with, so they have the same mentality, and there's not as much work that needs to be done, and they trust you to make those recommendations.
Wow. So again, private equity capital helped accelerate growth, but also helped accelerate to build out the admin support services, right? Here in central services?
Sure.
I mean, those things went in tandem, I guess?
Maybe the growth of the practices, the growth by the number of practices helped build out the MB2 services. And the reason why is because MB2 before, kind of whenever we set it up, was a zero-sum game. MB2 corporate was not there to make money, right? Yep. So we would each pay from our practices, in our partnership through our practices, a certain amount of money to central services, which allowed it to exist and thrive and grow. But back then, if there was any excess money, it would go back to the practices. Wow. It was never to make money. The money's made at the office level. And so we had 85 practices, probably about 85 people here, because that's how much money we could afford, like the money that flowed through would afford. It's very similar to, I would say, I think we got some now scale at Office 300 or 400, where finally now it's not necessarily a one-to-one, where I think we have 700 practices, but maybe 500 people here centrally at MB2, because we have been able to reach that scale. But the goal is still the same, where it's MB2, the practices pay some fee that's just to cover these people, and then it's not to be made as a profit center here at MB2.
Yeah, absolutely.
As someone on like the support service side during that recapitalization event, what I saw, like you asked about manpower, I saw an increase in efficiencies and technology. That was cool, was an ability to not necessarily need more manpower because we could be more efficient with the manpower we had. And I'm pretty sure that was around the time we started tinkering with like Jarvis and Pepper and some of the technologies we're still using
I
now.
mean, what year was that when you joined us?
I joined in 2016. So
Okay.
I had about a year before we recapped for the first time.
And that was right around when Justin Carroll, we brought in operations
Mhm.
because we didn't have operations before that. It was just, doing what we thought we knew, but having an operational guidance behind us who also was the brain behind the Jarvis creation to kind of put it out there. He would do everything by spreadsheets before then.
Oh my gosh.
And it was a lot of
JC
Excel
and his
documents.
spreadsheets.
Yeah, he's really good at spreadsheets.
Yeah.
That guy's a
It's a little
finance geek.
hypnotizing watching.
Yeah. But then it shifted to Jarvis, which now made everything just a lot easier.
Absolutely. So was there concern in 2017 to take outside capital, how that would impact the culture of the company?
There was, in that everybody bring in private equity, they're going to ruin your company and they're going to control everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we went through the process, we went through a full process in 2017. It took about 9 months. We started with 200 private equity groups, narrowed down to 15, where Dr. V and the execs would go through and have meetings with the 15, narrowed it down to the top 3. And I think the structure of during the process, we had 3 different structures too, whenever private equity was going to, the final 3. The top 2 were very structured, meaning they had a lot of stuff I don't understand in prefs and things where like they are better off than the doctors are. but Sentinel Capital Partners, they made it exactly the way we wanted it, where there's one level of stock. Every owner can own the exact same share, whether it's private equity or a doctor that just joins us. Everyone's treated the same and equal. And so by partnering with that group, even though they were not the highest value, it kept everything kind of intact.
It was the right fit.
It was the right fit. And so they left us alone and we did great. And yeah, it's been great since.
What a cool testament to the founding partners' principle and your vision, and to not like lose sight of that, right? Just for the sake of money, right?
Yeah.
Which you had every right to do. But again, you took an offer that was less superior economically, but it worked out, right? It worked out over the long term. Yeah, that long-term vision is special.
I think externally talking to doctors, they don't, we use the word recap and it's a weird word and they don't understand what it means. And I don't even know if it's like the right word, but I assume it is, right? Recap just means private equity changes hands, recapitalization of the business, something changing within the organization, right? The structure and the finances. And so in talking to outside doctors, they always ask, well, did it happen and who got paid and how many got to take advantage of it and is it real? And, I don't think recaps are real. Things like that, because in most businesses, most DSOs, either they don't reach that point or they haven't yet, or they're not dentists that make the money. It's the business guys.
Yeah.
And so with the recap idea and the process behind it, having doctors participate in that, it allows them to believe it to be real. And whenever you're doing that, they're sellers because they could sell part of their equity or they could sell part of what they own, but they're also buyers. They're buying equity into the new company. They don't have to, but almost everyone does, right? And so whenever you're an owner within MB2 and you go through the process and you do have a recap, it's a magical event, right? Where everyone talks about it, but realistically, because you're a seller and you're a buyer, you don't care necessarily if it's the highest value or if you just want it to be there long term. And so as owners, Dr. V, we're all still heavily invested in MB2. Financially, we're aligned, right? But when that happens, we want to make sure that we're here in 20, 30 years. We want to make sure everyone's happy because we're still here.
Right.
And so we have no incentive to go anywhere else, because they ask, well, when are you done? Well, there's no incentive to, right? We're just here. We're happy and we're still growing.
We just go here.
Yeah.
That's awesome. What do you think MB2 looks like in 10 years?
I don't know. I mean,
does anyone really know?
Bigger, hopefully. I don't. I hope it's still, honestly, in 10 years' time, I hope we're still all here and we're still doing what we're doing today and we haven't changed, right? Because for whatever it is, I feel it's special and I want it to continue staying that way and staying doctor-oriented and staying in charge of, doctor-centric.
Yeah. Well, before Joe closes us out, I always like to end these with a fun question. What is one of your favorite memories from an MB2 event?
I mean, favorite?
One of.
From It's not a good one, but
It came to your mind first, and now we got to hear it.
When we were younger, and we did that ATV trip just out in Huntsville, right? We did some stupid things. And I brought my brother, who was in dental school still. We had an oral surgeon who was there, and he went off and he flipped over his ATV and hit his face on a handlebar and cut his cheek. And he's a dental student. And then it was great. We had an oral surgeon there, so we stitched him up, and he has a scar, but he got stitched up right away. So I mean, that was just back in the days when we were doing things that probably didn't make the most sense, but it was cool having people there that you could trust and that can stitch you up.
I mean, that's brave. A face, like that's on your face.
I know, but he's an oral surgeon. He could do that kind of stuff.
Valid.
A few extra years of school. I love it. Yeah. That's fantastic. Well, Dr. Shahwan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you both very much for having me.
And we really appreciate taking the time. Listeners, we really appreciate joining MB2 Underground Podcast. We will catch you next time.
Later, skaters.
Later, skaters.